one is kind of an interesting one, simply because now it would be considered possibly a movie, but back then it wasn't really introduced as a movie, unless you consider it a two-part film, but really, whenever you look it up, it's called a miniseries. Even though by miniseries they mean it's two episodes that are an hour and a half long, and it was made back in the 90s where 3 hour movies were sort of unheard of in a way. So, this is another really good and tremendously well done Stephen King adaptation called The Langoliers. It's based actually on a Stephen King novella, which is a four-part series he wrote called Four Past Midnight, and the film is called The Langoliers because that's the name of sort of the creatures that are part of the film's sort of lore that it sets up. Now, this was made back in the mid to early 90s, probably also part of the late 80s as well, where they were kind of taking Stephen King books and stories and making the adaptations, but they knew that, like, in order to really tell Stephen King stories, you had to give it time and you had to really allow it to tell its story, and you couldn't do that with just one movie, but you couldn't, like, get the green light to make a sort of really long movie, and you didn't get the budget to make a string of movies or a series or a trilogy or anything like that. And it wasn't enough of a story to make a full show, because what they wanted series that lasted many seasons. So, like, this is where you got, like, It, the original 1990s version of Pennywise the Clown with Tim Curry. That as well is called a miniseries, which was 2 episodes. Then you had The Stand. The Stand is another version of that, which I think is actually 4 episodes that are like an hour to almost 2 hours long. The Langoliers is another film that falls right in the middle of that. And now, I'm still calling it a film because now the way you watch it is you watch it as a 3 hour long epic film. And I'm happy about that because it is a fantastic story. It is such a great film. It is probably one of my favorite films that is adapted from a Stephen King film that is very much not appreciated. Like, it doesn't get talked about enough. Like, we all talk about Pennywise, we all talk about The Shining, we all talk about, Stand By Me, Green Mile. There are so many amazing Stephen King book adaptations out there. The Langoliers, I feel, does not get talked about enough, and I really do appreciate the way they told this story. I appreciate the quality of the story for being that it was kind of just a regular ABC broadcast with the cast it had. It had a lot of good people. It had David Morse, who's been in tons of Stephen King stuff by himself. Dean Stockwell, who plays this author who kind of helps them along the way because he kind of like writes mysteries, so he's kind of trying to help them figure it out. The guy who plays the dude who's like a real asshole throughout the whole thing, he's a big deal too. I forget his actual actor name, but he was in a really big sitcom in the 80s. He was in Beverly Hills Cop. He was in True Romance. I forget the guy's name, but I remember the character he played was like bulky in the series he was famous for. But I don't remember the actor's name off the top of my head. But this had a good cast in it, and they played their roles well, and it's just a tremendous story. So now let's get into it. It's about this flight. It's a red eye that's leaving from somewhere in Los Angeles, and it's going to. I don't even think it matters where they're going. But when they're flying, they pass through what's sort of considered an aurora borealis almost. So now, what this is meant to play off is that an aurora borealis isn't just a light show, but sort of like this rip in time. And what happens is when they go through the light show, they're actually going back in time. And now what happens is when you go back in time, if you aren't supposed to, you die. but the only way you can survive is if you're asleep. So who just so happens to be sleeping on a red eye, when it's flying through an aurora borealis, basically just these small group of like 13 people who are the survivors when they all wake up and the plane's just flying and there's 300 other passengers, including both pilots, missing. So they land at an airport, which is dead. There's nobody there. And everything just seems very weird to them. And it's just them trying to figure out what's going on. And then you have the creepy asshole dude who's played by this other famous actor who I can't remember his name. And he's been told this creepy story by his father. And the story goes that if you are lazy, then you get left behind. And if you get left behind, the Langoliers come and get you. And then he starts telling this creepy story to this little blind chick. And this little blind girl, this little blind teenager, she starts sort of believing him. And she's like, what if he's right? What if the Langoliers are coming? And it's like, you kind of stop for a second. You go, what the fuck are the Langoliers, first of all? And you don't see them until very much later on in the story. And again, it's a 3-hour story. So a lot of it is very much tension building. It's sort of character development. And it's sort of understanding what's happening to all of them while they're also learning what's happening to them in the beginning as well. So you have all these different characters, but it isn't too many characters to kind of get lost in. And you sort of learn them along the way as you learn what's happening. So as far as it goes when it comes to film adaptations of Stephen King novels, or even just novellas and just really good stories, this is one of my favorites. And I think it definitely should be revisited by people who may not know too much about it, or even if it's never been visited by you, because it's not talked about enough. And I feel like it needs to be talked about more. It is such a good film. It is such a good Stephen King story and Stephen King concept. And maybe, yeah, when you finally do see the creatures, they're not the greatest animated, but, this is 1995. The animation wasn't the best. So when you compare it to, like, today's animation, like, Pixar wasn't what it is today that it was then, you know what I'm saying? And this is a TV series. This was like ABC trying to CGI these creatures that were like time swallowers. That's essentially what this is. It's like this time swallowing sort of thing where the Langoliers were this creature that swallow up past time. And the whole idea that the mystery writer, played by Dean Stockwell, what he kind of discovers is, there is never going to be any such thing as time travel, because whenever time passes, the Langoliers come and they destroy time. And I don't mind telling you sort of what the crescendo of it is, because this is a 25-year-old, not even 25, this is, what do we got, 22? This is almost a 30-year-old film, a 30-year-old series that was made for TV. And maybe just even that little bit of a snippet of the story is enough to get you kind of pushing forward to go, all right, let me sit down and watch this, even if you loved anything that Stephen King has done so far. And now, I'm telling you, this is written by the same dude who wrote The Mist, Shawshank Redemption. Like, you're not going to fail when you got something that's done by Stephen King. So definitely, if you're looking for something that is a little bit horror orientated, definitely looking for Stephen King, definitely looking for maybe some time traveling stuff, and maybe something that just gets a little underappreciated, and you got 3 hours to kill. It is a long story. It is a very, very long story, but it's totally worth it. I fucking love the Langoliers. And I might watch it tonight. I feel like every time I do an entry, it's either about something I've watched, or it's about something I haven't watched in a while, and then I'm probably talking myself into watching it again. Yeah, that's usually what happens.